And I think I might just leave Wonder Woman right there because she's just so adorable. Welcome to live She Money conversation with Julia Lipton here on LinkedIn. And I want to add Julia right now. Welcome, Julia. Oh, hold on a second. There you are. Hi, Julia.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for being the feature of She Money newsletter number 27. And thanks to everyone for subscribing. We just surpassed 100,000 direct subscribers to this newsletter, which shows sort of the interest of this idea of a financial newsletter with a gender lens. And I just try to identify with my team sort of the most interesting, incredible people to bring into the newsletter. And Julia, you are certainly one of them. So it's just an honor to have you featured in the newsletter and have you joining today.
Well, I'm excited to be here. And it's incredible what you've built. The more I learn about She Money, the more impressed I am.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we're just really getting started. I mean, it's been a newsletter, but we just launched shemoney.com. Thank you for giving us a little excitement. And it's really anchored in my personal passion around women in money and financial engagement and agency. And, you know, this is the first piece, as I shared in the newsletter, that I've written about Web3 because I am very new to this journey. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But just, I encourage everyone, I have my team here at the office. If you have comments or questions, post it to the chat and we will do our best to address them. And also this will be saved and archived as well. For those that are going to be viewing this after the fact, thank you for watching. And I hope you enjoy the conversation. So who is Julia Lipton? I was writing that down in my notes and I thought it would make a good, it would be like a Hulu special or something like that. But for those that might not have read the newsletter, obviously you were the founder of Awesome People Ventures, which is an early stage investment fund in Web3. And we're going to talk about that. But I'll say before how I met you is a couple of years ago, maybe more last year, I really wanted to figure out how personally I might invest in early stage companies in the Web3 space. So I went to an expert in this area, Joelle Caden of Accolade Partners. And I actually am an investor in one of her blockchain fund of funds. And I said, you know, Joelle, are any of your companies or funds female founded? Because I have a passion for investing with other women and, you know, want to support their leadership and incredible talents and think they may or may not invest differently. But my hope is they help to build more inclusive spaces, which I know you are very passionate about. And she said, interesting, let me go dig around. And sure enough, she came back and made an introduction to you, Julia, which is how I met you. And full disclosure, of course, I decided to invest in your incredible fund, which launched last year, correct?
Mm-hmm. Technically the beginning of this year.
Technically.
Yeah, so just for fun.
Which is really good timing, actually. We'll talk more about that later. So obviously, you know, you are a founder of the fund, but also an operator, and would love to hear a little bit more about your background. And I'm just going to turn off my notifications because that's really annoying. Sorry about that.
All good. Well, I started the fund Awesome People Ventures in 2019. And it has only been a crypto fund in this particular fund since this past year. And the journey, actually, I'll pause and kind of step way before that. My journey in tech got started running marketing teams. And so I started doing that right outside of college, or in college. I'd fly between LA and San Francisco, and when we were launching our first company. And I ran marketing teams, growth teams, ultimately ran a business unit at One Medical. And at the end of operating, I wanted to take a break. And during that time, I traveled around the world, did a bunch of things, which I recommend to everyone who gets the chance to do, because it really opened my eyes in different ways of working and living. And that was in 2017, which was the first crypto boom that a lot of us participated in. And what was interesting then is I was traveling, I was living in these remote, beautiful places, and people were consulting and freelancing and investing in crypto. And it was a really different reality than the one I was familiar with in San Francisco. And I became really inspired by all these digital nomads who are consulting and living their own lives and also investing in crypto. And I started doing that the next year. I just started consulting. Consulting quickly turned into advising, which quickly turned into angel investing. And before you knew it, I had like a full-blown angel investing habit. And
I like that. I think I have that too. Angel investing habit. Call it that.
And then over time, I think it becomes more of a habit and you actually want to get really good at it, you know?
Absolutely.
And especially as a like growth and revenue person at heart, you want to figure out like, well, you know, what makes money? Like which of these things is going to perform the best? And over the course of a couple years, my friend saw me doing this and eventually suggested that I should start a fund. And so that was the beginning of Awesome People Ventures. And I actually have to give, there's a man named Lars Dahlgaard. He was the founder of Success Factors. He was a GP at Andreessen for a bit as well. He was the one who originally suggested it and offered to be my first LP. And if it wasn't for him, which I think is really important, having people that will be your first believer, I probably would not be here today. So that was the beginning of Awesome People Ventures. And then over the past few years, I've only continued to fall more and more down the rabbit hole. So when it came down to Fund 2, I wanted to make sure that I was more focused just because I think I'll deliver better returns that way. And here we are, totally focused on Web3.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And, we're not going to talk a lot. We've talked in prior LinkedIn Lives with some of the challenges of, this second time fund manager. But, honestly, it seemed like you raised your money pretty quickly. You didn't want to be a gigantic fund. I think you closed, what was your close on Fund 2, the total size? 20. Yeah.
Super small.
Yeah, but it's enough money to have an impact in this space, and and there are a lot of challenges being an early stage fund manager, certainly in a space where, like me, you don't really understand it. Honestly, I think a lot of newcomers, but you have quite the list of investors in the fund, which is fabulous. Some that, like me, who might be relatively new to the space, but some that certainly aren't.
Yeah, and I have to give some of those people credit. I mean, a lot of it to Chris Dixon's credit. Like as I was falling down the rabbit hole, I would send him ideas, and especially as I was starting to understand DAOs and could we make Awesome People a DAO? And he kept encouraging me. And whenever I was like, I don't know, I'm not sure about this, he'd be like, well, nobody knows. Like just keep going. And you're like, okay,
Yeah.
got
it. One thing that attracted me, I have to say, when we first had our call, Julia, and this sort of gets into sort of my next question, and now that we've answered a little bit of who is Julia Lipton, is, when you're talking about Web3, because I do think, and I have stacks of books and, articles, and honestly, not even me, like I'm so special, but it's so overwhelming, and not knowing, especially from an investment thesis, but also just knowledge and engagement. And like, what's real, what's not, what's hype, has impact, what's actually trying to make the world a better place, what's not, is it just another, scheme for a certain group of people who are, early adopters to make money at the expense of those who come along later and, aren't as smart and savvy as they are. So there's a lot of, like, in this space in particular, including, which is one of my favorite papers. I don't know if, Michael Semblast, but I love him. He's at JP Morgan. And in this piece, which we're going to post in the link, is called The Maltese Falcon on Cryptocurrencies and Blockchain. But there are a lot of smart people, that are saying this is, and more crypto, I say, than Web3. But anyway, before we go into the investment thesis around this, and I love how you described it in the article, but for those who haven't read it, like, what is Web3? Like, how would you describe it in terms of, what it really is and the evolution that landed us here? And, just hit us with some of the sort of the key concepts that it's important to understand if you want to go into a Web3 journey.
Yeah. I think the way people commonly talk about it is Web 1 was read, meaning you could look at a website and you could read it. Web 2 was read write. So we can now interact. Like right now, you can interact with this chat. You can message us on LinkedIn. You can post things, read write. And Web 3 as read write own. So right now in Web 2, even if you're reading and writing on LinkedIn, LinkedIn's still the one making all of the money from your content. But in a Web3 version, you could imagine the contributors to the network, in this case being LinkedIn, also earning and owning a piece of that value as well. And I think that's what's so interesting to me about Web3, and it's about what's gotten a lot of us interested in it, is this notion that if you can have better value creation, attribution, and distribution, you can improve, you can help make a lot more people a lot more money. And you can help people who are creating value to platforms and networks actually be able to profit from that value that they're creating.
Yeah, and honestly, that's what's so exciting to me. And we talk about access points, and I want to come back to that. What is your access point? But let's just sit on that for a minute, because that is a bit of the promise, right? And why it's worth caring about. Because I think at the end of the day, and this is sort of, I think and I think your sort of philosophy is, some people are lucky. A lot of people are smart. A lot of people are creative. And your success in life shouldn't be dependent on luck, or what family you were born into, or what school you went to, or privilege. It shouldn't be dependent on privilege, and I think a bit of the promise that you said, especially in the creative space, is that if you have talent, if you have passion, if you were creative, you are going to find a way to monetize that, or that is less dependent on gatekeepers or privilege or a lot of these other things. And I know it's early days, but, just to stick on that for a second, and we'll get into the promise of Web3 at the very end, but, maybe even, well, I don't know. I just turn that over to you. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the promise. And, in some ways, Axie Infinity is a bad example, because it's kind of like crashed and burned. But for those that aren't familiar, Axie Infinity was the most, maybe still is, popular crypto game. And it was huge in the Philippines. Like, people were basically playing this as their job. And there's some huge problems with the mechanics of Axie, and given that Axie, their token has totally crashed, it's actually hurt a lot of people that were relying on this as income. So I don't want to hold it up as the end all be all. But what was interesting about it is they're all players of this game, and they're all earning. There was, I don't know, probably a year or so where like a ton of people were earning their living by playing this game. And in Web 2, you play a game, you aren't going to, in most cases, like earn, there aren't like hundreds of millions of dollars flowing between the users and the network in the same way, where people are paying their rent.
Yeah. And that's just, that's even there. I'd want to spend half an hour like going down that rabbit hole.
It's complicated, which is why I was hesitant to share it. And the exact numbers don't necessarily quote me on, because I haven't looked at them recently. But it is kind of an interesting premise where you're like, oh, the players of this game are the owners of this game.
But like, that's it, right? Really, like, yes. And that's where I get the participation element, whether the merits of, playing a game to earn a living. I mean, people are doing that in all sorts of different ways, are football players any different? Like, if you're the best of what you do and people find it entertaining and engaging, it's just a different way to think about it.
If you're addicted to Candy Crush, you probably aren't, or whatever.
Or Wordle, like Bill Gates.
Yeah. Like, you don't earning a ton of money by playing this game all day. Like, it's the company is earning the money, not the players, right? Like, that's kind of the distinction, is like the individual contributors or the players or the people engaging in the Web3 experience. They're the ones engaging, but also getting to create and keep that value, as opposed to today, it's largely the corporations.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, I mean, again, if we're going sort of this idea of sort of what is Web3, maybe we'll just, and you described it in that way, maybe hit just a couple of other kind of, I would say, categories, how you see it, and then we'll get into your investment thesis around it. But when you think of Web3 as sort of this big umbrella and these categories, and there's a lot of, interplay between some of these categories, like for a newcomer to Web3 and thinking about it from an education and or starting to think about from an investment or even a career perspective, how further would you describe it?
Yeah. I think I even put this in my newsletter. Like it's such a big space. And so there are certain categories that people often are most interested in Web3, whether it's NFTs or DeFi or DAOs or protocol tokens and trading. And I think the best thing to do is to figure out like which of these are you most interested in and make that your scope for now when you're just trying to get involved. And I think in my article, I probably phrased it more eloquently. I can actually probably pull it up. Like people who love finance and trading, they often start with DeFi because it's decentralized finance. So that makes sense to them.
Yeah.
People who really like org design and people often start with DAOs and because it makes sense with them. Like people who are really technical and interested in blockchain often start with protocols, collectibles, NFTs. And so these different spaces, whatever you're most interested in personally, I think is the easiest place to start, and like defining what you're interested in one of those buckets will help make it manageable.
Yeah, exactly. And even so, it gets, oh my gosh, that's big even within those categories.
Yeah.
And I think the way to bring it to life a little bit is to start talking about it, I would say, from an investment perspective. And we are going to talk a little bit about career perspective too, which is a different entry point. You know, we talk about, of course, not everyone has capital to quote unquote invest, but that's also interesting because you can invest in the space with minimal funds. You know, if you choose, you know, crypto, for example, there are public equities that trade that are kind of on ramps, off ramps, or facilitate, you know, rails, as one might say. I don't know, I might use that wrong. So there's a lot of ways that you can invest in it without, you know, doing what we're the magic we're making together, which is investing in early stage companies. So let's just start with, you know, your own investment philosophy for the fund and some of the categories. But actually, no, story. I'm going to pull that back because, you know, I think we're going to bring it to life with some specific examples. But you mentioned in our pre-call that, you know, there's a lot of ways to invest in Web3, and you have friends obviously that are doing it in all sorts of ways. So maybe from an investment perspective, you can talk a little bit about, you know, what are some of the various ways, you know, people, you know, or, you know, more generally one can invest in Web3.
Yeah. And I think those kind of go back to those categories I just mentioned.
Yeah.
And each of those has their own way of making money. And, you know, DeFi, people are lending capital and lending into different liquidity pools that have different yield. People who are really interested in art and culture and communities, a lot of those people were trading NFTs. And based on community engagement and what they were most interested in, they just focused on buying, flipping, holding NFTs. And in DAOs, similar. What's interesting about DAOs in particular, we talk about like not everyone has the capital. What's most interesting to me about DAOs is you're earning by contributing to the community in a DAO. So you can contribute time and talent, if not capital. And so, for example, in the DAO that I started, we reviewed DAO tools. People were getting paid for reviewing these DAO tools within our DAO. And so people are working but earning in these tokens, which is quite interesting. And this is like people's side projects, almost like open source projects, but people are getting compensated. And so that's a way to invest with time. And there's all these different verticals. The one that I'm most specialized in is actually investing in early stage startups, which itself is a vertical, right? Like I don't trade NFTs. I don't do complicated DeFi strategies. I'm not like a liquidity provider for bootstrapping networks. All of this is mumbo jumbo. You really don't need to know it. But the key takeaway is that like just find the one thing that you like and learn that. And that's kind of how I watch my friends do it, where I have friends that are experts in any given vertical.
Yeah. And honestly, it's so interesting to me because, I mean, not that many people I know are actually, I mean, people own Bitcoin or Don't or own Coinbase or things like that. But in terms of what you're talking about, and I wonder if it's a big generational thing. I mean, I'm 57, you know, so I'm a couple years older than you are, maybe decades. But, you know, I do wonder if it's a generational thing. Pardon me?
Not in spirit.
That's right. Thank you, Julia. But, and again, it's not all about making money, right? Like it is about understanding, and I do feel like it's just, to me, it's a whole new sector and it's fun. And I think there is a lot of, to your point of DAOs, so decentralized autonomous organization, for those who might not know what DAOs are, but I will say just as an access point, like I thought, okay, yay, I love communities, I love networks. And then I'm on some Discord, which I don't really get what to do. And maybe I put my name and I'm not supposed to do that. And I don't have a wallet, which allows me to get paid. And then what do I pay for anyway? Like it becomes, and I'm just don't know if I'm going to hold this up.
All of that's really real.
A hot mess when it comes to like figuring out what to do. But, I do wonder about that, Julie. And I hear what you're saying, like just find an entry point. We have tons of resources that we link to, which I just want to call out because you were so generous, especially to bring women into this space. You talked about Surge, which is their tagline is securing women's place in Web3. SheFi, a DeFi educational initiative and global community of women who want to go from crypto curious to crypto confident. I'm like, I want that on a t-shirt. My BFF, which is learning crypto together, and Boys Club, your guide to the cryptoverse. I love this. ETH Pray Crypto. I'm like, who are these people who designed this? I want them to do some branding for JP Morgan or something. But to your point, there's just those learning things, and we'll post some of those in the chat and they're in the article, are just, they're just a rabbit hole of information and fun, it seems to me.
Totally. And I think especially at this stage, like all your concerns about DAOs, like you want to sign in, but you now need a Discord and a name and a wallet, like all of that is so real. And I don't think we can expect 99% of people to engage in it in that form, which is why you hear people say things like, we are so early. Because we are, like, it's just a really, really small group of people who's playing around with this stuff. Yeah. I forget, I think it was a Decentraland stat, which is like a metaverse land-based company, which in Web3, we talk about like, it's like a real thing. And I saw some metrics from them and it was like, 1,000, I forget if it was DAUs or MAUs, daily active users, monthly active users, but it was like nothing, and you're like, okay, no, this is so early. Like this is not a thing yet.
Yeah. Well, so, and you feel, but there is such a feeling. And I do think, to just bring in sort of the gendered component to this a little bit, because, when you look at even traditional is it called TraFi? I don't know.
TradFi. Yeah.
TraFi. I feel so cool when I say that. Having been head of Goldman Sachs, like there were so few women, back when I started, and there still are. You look at in leadership positions in financial institutions, certainly in funds, in terms of capital allocators. And I guess my, angst is that, oh my gosh, we're in the forefront of yet another potential boom, and there has been, and we'll talk a little bit about the boom and the bust cycles that are endemic in any, new technology, et cetera, but that, is that a certain population is really left behind because, of these barriers of education or assumptions of what it is and isn't. So, I think the gender component and those resources we mentioned are oriented to like, come on, ladies, let's not be left behind on the Web3 are real. I just really love your perspective on that.
I'm really concerned about it. And the reason why I'm concerned about it is if you looked at the last boom, the amount of wealth creation was unlike anything we've seen in that short amount of time. And so you have wealth compounding faster that can then, people are making money and then they can invest that and make more money. And it's primarily men. And so you have this like runaway economic success happening. And the wealth inequality is greater than in Web 2 because of the speed at which it compounds and the liquidity. So you can make money and reinvest money way faster than ever before.
Yeah. And, and a lot of this is pump and dump, right? Which is, who wants to be part of that to some degree too, right?
Well, and to be fair, that's one of the reasons why, I was quite slow to I mean, to this day, basically I buy and hold, right? Whereas my friends that are trading, right? Like I've held ETH since 2017 and I only really sell it to do things with it, buy NFTs to experiment with new communities or purchase tokens to get access to something. Like I don't trade, but a lot of the pump and dump stuff was where a lot of people made a lot of money, which I don't think is as attractive to women as well, which is challenging.
Well, and I went to Cryptopia in Utah, which was a conference a few months ago. And, as one of literally a handful of females there. And certainly a woman over the age of 50, I think there was one more person. There was like a
You must have
conference.
been a celebrity.
No, not at all. It was so uncomfortable and awkward. I was like, oh, where are my headphones? But it was just so much of sort of hype and, I'm not, and very gamer. I mean, there's some great women on the panels, and really interesting stuff. Like, again, when you get into the creative side of this, it's really fun. And there was a project, I can't remember the name. It's a series where you help co-create the characters, and there's a DAO around the series. I can't remember Mila Kim. She doesn't know what I'm talking about. This actress who's amazing, who's in the space. And anyway, having been a film person and in Sundance fun films, like the idea of like creating content and characters, and you engage. And Jane Fonda, oh my gosh, it's these cats. You know what I'm talking about?
It's the stoner cats.
Stoner cats. That's it. They had the stoner cat women up there, and they were talking about it. And I was like, what? And they showed us the series. Like, you could, if you were a part of the DAO, could you, watch it. And then you got Mila Kunis. Thank you, Madison. But I was like blown away because that was fantastic. Like, rather than just watching content, you're part of it. And I was like, how did they get Jane Fonda to be like, the owner of the cats, like that was so cool. But so again, I think versus there is that, this assumption of what it is and what is your point of engaging. Maddie, can you turn this off for me? I'm so sorry. It keeps beeping. What is your entry point? And just if you could, and maybe, let's hold that for the career point, because I do think there's so many jobs in this space that have the potential, especially, and we talk about wealth creation. Well, let me just say one more thing about that. When, we talk a lot here at She Money about what is, how it's your path to financial independence, prosperity, and it used to be, and is the American dream alive, and all of these things, because we're very interested in educating around financial wellness. And, I come from Wall Street, and it's still true, you get a job in traditional finance, you can make a lot of money. We call it clipping the coupon, is sort of the insider baseball language around that you can just get a really big paycheck every year. You can save a lot. You probably have a lifestyle that matches. But in terms of a path to wealth creation, it's why we're supporting, women-owned businesses and entrepreneurship and funding, funds and startups, is because it is a real, pathway to wealth creation. And that wealth is not money for money's sake. It just positively impacts your own wellness, your families, and, with the goal of, changing the trajectory of your life based on your own creativity. And we have access to capital being a big barrier. So it's not so much, okay, let's make everyone into the next crypto trader or NFT buyer. It's saying this is a pathway where your creativity and your energy and ideas have the possibility of creating something really cool, and for which, because of the trajectory of the technology, can be wealth creating for not only that one person who founded it, but hopefully in some of these models for those that participate in that creation. So that's where I get pumped.
Totally. Me too.
Yeah. So I'd love to jump in, to your investment. I mean, to bring this alive a little bit in terms of the companies that you invested in. And, you talk about your portfolio being focused on tooling products, DeFi, DAOs. But bring up, and we mentioned in the article, which I went in to look a little bit about them, Archive as an example of a company in this space that's just fundamentally reimagining something that is very familiar in the Web 2, or is it the real world? I don't know. I don't know how to say that. But talk about Archive a little bit, just as an example of something that's quite revolutionary.
Yeah. So I love this one, and I think most people can understand Archive. So Archive is trying to build art collecting DAO. So you can imagine the Smithsonian, but if it was actually owned by all the people. So today, the people who sit on art boards, the largest galleries across the world, almost 90% of them are men. And 75% of those people are over the age of 50. And so the people who are picking the art and curating the art aren't representative of like culture. And on top of that, art as an asset class has historically outperformed the S&P, but the only people who own art, other than these galleries and art collectors, are individuals who have a lot of money. And so the world's art very much isn't owned like for the people, by the people. And so what Archive is doing is building an art collecting DAO where people in the community in the DAO are curating what art, physical art, not like NFTs, the DAO should buy. And ultimately their goal is to have, the largest, coolest art collection that is owned by the community. And it's really cool. There's like curator roles that are helping pick the stuff out, and everyone gets to vote if you're a member, and they're actively buying culturally significant pieces.
So what triggers in my head around this is, okay, isn't that a security? Is that a fund? What, how does it ever monetize? Like, do you get your money out? Like, how do you buy in? Like, of course, my head goes into why financial services can get so complicated.
I think there's still a lot of questions around like regulation and DAOs and all of that. So those are valid questions. But you effectively own, it kind of depends like what role that you play in these various DAOs. But in this particular case, you own a persona. You own, if all the art is in a treasury, as a member, you own some percentage of that treasury and that value, which is really different than being a member of like, when I lived in SF, I was a member of the SF MoMA. Yeah. And it got me access in the door, but it didn't get me anything more than that.
Yeah.
Like definitely nothing to do with the value of the art, definitely nothing to do with picking the art or curating the experiences. It was one-way relationship.
Exactly. And then to your point about not just who's on the board, but who gets, to your point, who picks the artists that are collected, and you get picked to have a piece in, any major gallery, that a significant bump, what someone's willing to pay for your art. And we're talking the livelihoods of artists, right? So to your point, and I love art. My walls are filled with art, but to find someone, an emerging artist, and promote them, and is huge, and to democratize that, right? That's another buzzword around all of this. So that, I love that. And can you give us another example of a company that either in your portfolio or that you think just sort of brings to life what you love about Web3?
Yeah, here's another one that's in our portfolio. It's a bit complicated. It might not be the example. I was gonna use this example of Solid World, which is a company that's in the climate meets crypto space. I'll try to give it a go. So one of the things that happens, the carbon credit markets are expected to grow, depends who you ask, by 2050, some people think that they'll 100x. So the carbon credit markets are expected to grow exponentially, but there's a ton of problems in the carbon credit markets today, including lack of transparency, accountability. There's a lot of credits being traded. You don't really know what's what. A lot of it happens via brokers, middlemen. The market itself is a mess. And on top of that, if you're funding carbon credit projects, which are really, really important right now to be working on forests and mangroves, and you can actually earn types of climate credits that are recycling refrigerants, like all sorts of things that are good for the planet. On the carbon credit side, when you fund a project, you're issued forward contracts, which means you aren't even really given carbon credits. You're just given a piece of paper that says, when these trees grow in 5 years, you have this contract that says you will be issued the carbon credits from this project. Well, that's a bit of a problem because it means people need to be investing a ton of money into the environment right now to help the planet, but that they're putting the money in and then it just sits in a piece of paper for 5-10 years until they can trade these credits. And even once they can trade the credits, no one trusts these marketplaces because people don't really know what they are and the whole situation. And so what these guys are doing is they're helping turn those pieces of paper into liquid tradable assets post investment. And with everything being trackable to exactly what the project is, what they think the projected value of the credits is, and with this level of like transparency and accountability, that is quite cool, and it is on chain. And so the value that they're really bringing there is kind of twofold. One is this transparency and accountability. And then the second is they can really increase the size of the market by making all the investment needs to happen now. Like we need to invest more than we ever have had before. And so the vast majority of the investment in these like future credits and these credits will be now. But if it's liquid, it's a pretty unattractive investment for a lot of folks. And so they can make the size of the investable assets in this crypto climate space much, much bigger by making them liquid. I realized that was
makes
kind
so
of
much sense. Well, no, I get it because with drone technology too, you can map and track and make sure there's, not fraud and, the incentive then becomes, it's just a totally different value proposition depending on how those future credits are discounted to present, right? Like it's a much more sort of, what does it cost me to put trees on this land and plant and contribute for them? You're paying people to plant trees basically. And doing other things, but that's a big part of it.
Developers. But yeah, exactly. And so there's an accountability part, there's a transparency part, there's a ability to tap into DeFi markets for better, faster loans to things that banks might not loan. Like there's a lot of climate projects right now that are focused on funding, where a lot of the projects today are too small for banks to fund, or banks don't know how to underwrite them and whatever it might be. And people are, using DAOs and DeFi principles to figure out how to vet and pick projects and then underwrite them.
Yeah, I know, and that's a complicated example, but it's real. I mean, again, some of this is, to the point of not just hype, right? Like there really is a lot of intention in this world, especially in the investment space, to find solutions, right, to problems. And especially in the financial space, I think there are just so many gaps, and especially the lack of transparency, which is often so present, and the potential for malfeasance or even fraud or, or disintermediation, right? That's sort of the key to this. So those are two great examples. What I'd love to, I'm just looking at our time together, and I might end future of Web3. So one more topic, and then we're going to let's hopefully end on an exciting, like hopeful front, because I think this is all hopeful. And, maybe just 1 second. I mean, look, a lot of people, including myself, thankfully I didn't, bet the ranch, but, went into a little bit of crypto or Bitcoin or Coinbase or, bought into an NFT thinking it was going to the moon forever, which is always not true. But, in terms of where we are, just comment a little bit about the market crash and how it feels like things are settling out, because the argument for that is some of the hype is gone, and now you're going to have real builders recommit, and they're going to be lower valuations of deserving companies and founders, and it's going to, it's cyclical. And I think it's generated also a lot of fear, because knowing what's real and the fraud, right, is real in terms of, well, not just the theft, not just the fraud, but the theft. So talk a little bit about where we are in the cycle of this, and a little bit of how it's settling out. And then we're going to go into a little bit of a discussion about careers in Web3.
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball. So I won't, pretend like I know, because my guess is as good as anyone else's. But I mean, there definitely was a crash, and I think it's possible that we aren't at the bottom yet. We'll see. Like, so much of this stuff is dependent on macroeconomic factors. For a while, crypto traded wasn't correlated with the markets, which is what people liked about it.
Mm-hmm.
But in the past year or so, it's been correlated with the markets. And so depending on what the public markets do, I think that will hugely impact what the crypto markets do. And I do think the builder thing is real. Like it's a lot more fun to be a venture investor right now than it was at the peak of the bull market, because everyone you're talking to feels really in it. It's interesting at the market level from a venture perspective, because so much capital flooded the markets at the funds, the valuations haven't dropped nearly as much as I would have expected, because so many funds have to put so much capital to work. And so, Jacki, I don't know if you've noticed, I know some of my LPs have noticed, like, we have not called capital as fast as we are expecting to call capital. And realistically, I don't think we'll call capital. Maybe we'll call capital in like a month, but we will have ended up calling, maybe 30% of capital in year one. And we expected to probably call closer to 50% in year one, because I think the valuations still are quite high. And they might stay that high. It's still something I'm watching, just given how much investor VC capital is in the space. But I think it really highlights an important reality, which is, even if they're valuable to VCs at the end of the day, for these things to exit and to not just dump on retail, which is not cool, they have to generate real value.
Well, and I love that you said that, because, markups are one thing, creating a company that really does well and has value and is another thing. But to your point, and I don't have that list of companies. I'd be curious, but it's so interesting, the interplay, because at the end of the day, success in funds is based on a liquidation and a return of capital that is right now in dollars. Maybe I guess you can get money back in different ways, or distributed tokens, or whatever it is. But it's just, what's so interesting, and this is, is we're really starting to navigate between worlds, and yet still very much dependent on a physical, and current infrastructure. So those, the ways that investing and these businesses, are getting created, in theory, against, as whole nother language and ethos and culture, is still, very dependent on, everything else here, to make work. Yeah. So that's what makes it interesting too. And, I think personally, and I think a lot of folks, I see Erican is on our call today. Hi, Erican. I'm waving you. I'm so glad, a fellow venture early stage investor and in the space, with shout out to Erican, that it's, and to be an accountable, like, investor, right? Like, it's, I remember talking to Erican about this with her fund, is like, okay, you can invest, but like, what are the safety measures, and what are the what's in place, to ensure that at the end of the day, you're investing and have on rails, and things in place that really do, as a fiduciary, are accountable for investor capital. That's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely something that keeps me up at night, and probably should keep everyone
yeah.
Like,
and it's
job.
Yeah, it's not. And I know I'm eyes open, but that's one thing we want to do, is educate and empower, and not saying anything is, guaranteed, as they say. So I want to, transition a little bit into just a bit of careers in crypto, because, not just crypto, but Web3, because, one of the big tenets we talked about is earning, that there's a lot of startups, there's a lot of early stage. And my hope, and I'm curious if this is true, that companies in this space are a little bit more inclusive. It's not like, founder keeps 98% of the capital, or whatever raises, but there's much more employee participatory capital. So, and you said something brilliant when I asked you this in the article about careers in Web3, is you said, it's just another tech sector. And So talk a little bit about the talent, maybe a little bit about pay, career trajectory for those that have this, maybe have skills, don't, want to retool. Talk a little bit about career prospects in Web3 and any advice you might give someone who's interested. Again, we're talking about a big umbrella bunch of companies where there's traditional marketing and pure tech jobs, but just a little bit of perspective from would be great.
Well, I mean, for starters, I really mean what I say about like it's another tech sector, right? And if it's something that you're interested in, like you can definitely do it. Like Web3 needs marketers, Web3 needs customer experience people, Web3 needs community builders. The role names might be different, right? Like a customer success manager, I think would be excellent at like a Discord community manager role. But functionally, it's your skill sets are definitely applicable. So if it's something that you're interested in, like the first thing I just want to say is like you can do it. In terms of what jobs are available, all those great kind of women education groups I listed, whether it's She-Fi, Surge, Boys Club, I think almost all of them, us as well, awesome people, all have pallet boards or job boards that are explicitly trying to help more women get jobs. And so if you're interested just in seeing what's out there, almost all of these communities have some sort of job and hiring network as well, which will make it much easier for you to get involved.
And just to the point, make sure you follow Julia on Twitter, because I went down the Julia Lipton rabbit hole on Twitter.
Bombastic.
It's so awesome. And you know what's awesome? I didn't even plan that. It just fell out of my face. But it's just so cool how you're so supportive. And you had Palette, which is, and by the way, your link to tips on how to get Web3 jobs didn't click through to something happened there. But in terms of, so don't follow that link in the newsletter because it didn't work. But that said, I was like, Palette? What the heck is this? Can you describe even what that is? Because you had, I think 111 jobs or something on Palette. And I was like, what is Palette? I've never heard of that.
Yeah. So Palette boards are job boards in talent collectives that are used by communities. So in our case, the 111 people are people who know awesome people or in some way are affiliated, and they are looking for jobs. So they apply, and we have a very tight curation checklist. And if they meet our criteria, we accept them into our collective. We really just focused on people that have really top-notch previous experience. And so we're very narrow in our particular focus. And we accept them into our talent community, and then companies can subscribe to that talent base. And they can also post jobs. And so they can see everyone that's looking, which is one of the things that's so cool about all these like women's groups that are trying to bring more women into cryptos. They also have these Palette communities. And so you can sign up for their talent collectives as well. And then companies are subscribed to be able to see all these women that are looking for roles. I think Surge actually has one of the largest Palette crypto Web3 communities. And it's just a very cool tool to help your community get paid. Yeah.
And are you talking about like side hustles or projects, within DAOs or other structures?
No, they're mostly full-time jobs. So if you look at the jobs that are posted on the Awesome People Palette, they're basically portfolio companies hiring full-time.
Well, and that's fascinating to me, again, and maybe it gets into a little bit of sort of the future, because I look too, like we're here in Utah, we're trying to build a community, help women build their social capital and connect and get opportunities for lots of different things, right? Job opportunities, fun, friendships, mom advice, menopause advice. I'm like, hands up, give me some of that. But, this idea of jobs in particular, it seems, so inefficient, like to look at a resume, right? Like, and to me, like, maybe this is just personal, like want a little bit of Julia Lipton's brain on this for a minute. But I look here in Utah and the job crisis, or in general, everyone's trying to hire. There seems to be just massive problems with talent finding opportunity. And I hadn't heard of Palette. So I'd like your your big brain looking at this little example of like, okay, matching talent to opportunity and upward trajectory, which is, what everyone's aspiration is in terms of growth and earning potential, and how this, because I didn't heard about Palette, maybe it's not a Web3 solution, but I think that's fascinating. And as it relates to talent, I'm just curious on your perspective on, is it broken, and is this actually
I
a
think
really,
it's still
really
broken.
interesting
This is
solution?
one of the things I became really passionate about this even before starting the fund. We actually started this newsletter, the Awesome People newsletter. It's awesomepeopleco.substack.com. And it started as a BCC newsletter. Now it's a Substack. But I started the newsletter so I could promote my friends to help them find consulting and freelancing jobs. So not full-time. But the reason why I started it is because I was trying to convince them that like consulting and freelancing was the best thing ever, because you could own your own cash flow and you could own your time and you could pick your projects. And they were all said that they couldn't do it because they didn't have the network, which is true in most cases. And once I realized that, I was like, oh, well, I have the network, so I could just promote you to all my smart friends that are hiring. I could promote all my talented friends to all my smart friends that are hiring via this newsletter. And that's how it got started. But I think that's the crux of almost all talented people's hiring from the talent side challenges. If you don't have the network, it's really hard, which is part of the reason why I think these like women in Web3 communities are so cool, because they kind of help you build your network and find roles at the same time, or find your passion at the same time. And I think the hiring market is so broken because it is trust-based, and it's really hard to establish trust. There are some really interesting things happening in Web3 around credentialing and like verified credentialing, what people have done that I think should help, but it's going to take a long time, or around helping people vouch. Basically, almost like if you were to think about a tech network, this might be too far, but like if you were to think about like, the blockchain and like the role of like a validator, you could imagine almost humans like validating and vouching for people as well. And so there's some really interesting things happening in Web3 that I think will make hiring easier long term. But I agree with you that it is a massive problem.
Yeah, and it's not only, I mean, yes, it's true for, women fund managers, right? Starting to start funds. There's so many applications across industry, and I bring it back a little bit to the money space because that's what I'm so passionate about. Yeah. But it's so true. Like, how do you, in terms of trading talent or investing talent, or, all of this, it's just, and oftentimes, especially what, this personally, when you go spin off, and not it's all about fund management, but you can have a track record that doesn't leave with you, or how do you create that, list of what, and it's not just skills, right? Like proven track record of performance in any field. And how do you carry that with you? Because at the end of the day, if your company that you're with, hopefully they treat you well and they reward you. But if they don't, then you have to leave, you're kind of, what are you left carrying, And I think about that a lot.
I think they're like credentialing and the reward systems and the basically like credit units of work systems that are being built in Web3 are really cool, and should hopefully solve some of those problems long term. But I did want to highlight something that you were touching on around like training talent or finance talent. One of the things that is really interesting, and I think makes Web3 much easier, if you have this skill set for participating in Discords or participating on Twitter, people don't care about your CV because it's real life proof of work. Like if you're contributing really valuable insights in Discord to whatever community you're participating in, or contributing really interesting, thoughtful content on Twitter, people can actually see your work because so much of it's in public, or at least in public within the scale of these communities. And so, for example, even in DAO Masters, someone jumps in and starts being really strong in ops, like, great, do you want to run our ops? Like, here, go for it, do you want to start a newsletter? Do you want to start running community events? Like the people who you can see their quality of work get rewarded much faster in this ecosystem, because people really just care about the quality of your contributions to the community. And because that stuff's public, you can get a job that way. I mean, we had this wonderful high school woman running our Twitter spaces for a bit, and like half these people are anonymous. I don't even know who they are. Like, it's the farthest thing from a resume. All I know about them is the quality of their contributions.
Well, and to your point, like we think about it and we're wrapping up, but in the future of Web3, and again, I might be still a hot mess, but I might be, wait for it, a genius. I don't know. I think you are the genius. But, I think about what we're trying to do here in Utah, what you're trying to do in your space. Utah is one of the worst places, unfortunately, in terms of the gender gap, in terms of women. There's a labor shortage, there's all these challenges. And, we created this community, and we're really trying to reimagine what community looks like. And also, if you have a lot of women's networks, other types of networks. And this is, we're thinking about creating a DAO of some sort here in Utah amongst, maybe anchored in She Place, with the idea we're going to support each other. We're going to create, there's events, there's all sorts of things we can do around a set of values, which is to help each other thrive and prosper. Right. So my brain goes to, which I'm going to tap on your brain more, is what do we build and how to create it in a way that is not the traditional, even the models of engagement. Like, I love my team here. And, we had this amazing woman here the other day who's just moved here from Colorado. And she's like, how can I help? And I'm like, I don't know, but there are a million things that we need and want to do. So to use these structures and examples, and again, I think it's sort of crossing maybe some of the intergenerational divide. But to me, and I was on the board of Sundance, Institute for a long time. Like, how do you really, for communities that really want to get involved and do something and share values and engage, and how do you do that? How do you reward them? Like, I think there are going to be nonprofits that should exist, not in our traditional structures, right? But in these structures, like, this is where my head starts. I literally, I'm like J-Lo on, we do this. I'm doing J-Lo because I get like goosies about the potential for all of this, right? And maybe that's a note to end on, is a real hopeful one. So Julia, I mean, an hour went by. I feel like we're going to have more conversations. I want to, and watch and you are the most generous, awesome, notice how I use that again, communicator and builder, and follow Julia on Twitter, and you're going to have more funds in your companies and all of those things. But where do you want to end this conversation today? Is there anything we didn't talk about that you just want to put an exclamation mark around before we close? And we're going to close.
I think the biggest thing is that this future is still really being built, and to not be intimidated by it, to understand that everyone who starts is like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And part of that is because it's messy and it's early, but the benefit and upside and kind of optimism comes from being able to jump in and help shape the future. And I think that is like a once in a generation opportunity and a really, really cool moment in history for us all to participate in.
Yeah. Well, Julia, thank you. I think we're going to post our She Place, join the She Place community if you haven't already. We're going to start to do so much more fun stuff in this space. We have amazing people, in our orbit, like Julia. We're going to end with a little bit of a dance party, but as we always do, because we have to put the fun in finance. That's kind of my kicker at the end. And Julia, I adore you. I am so grateful to you for being in this world, your generosity, what you're doing, your network. I really just adore everything about you. And I'm so excited to be a partner with you in what you're doing and the companies you're supporting. So more conversations, maybe with Julia, maybe a visit to Utah. I don't know, but we would love to host you anytime in our little Wonder Woman den of financial fun. So thanks, Julia. And we're going to end with some music. If you want to listen for 30 seconds, anybody online, thanks for joining online. Thanks for watching. And join us at She Place and She Money. Oh no, we only have it on my phone.